Do you feel like living trash? Are you being consumed by the many burdens? Do you need a quick solution? Go outside. Go outside. Go outside. Why not try going outside? Outside has fresh air, friendly plants. Outside. There are creatures out there. Enjoy sweet freedom. Outside. Get pelted with ice. Complement the splendor of nature with the new Play Outside collection from Cool Shirts. Visit the link in my description and use code LeeSpeaks for 10% off your order. Play outside. Thank you to Cool Shirts for sponsoring today's video. Girls Go Games, where the girls and the gays go to game. This exceptionally pink website was my flash gaming source of choice when I wasn't on Antcon Arcade. And throughout the years, although this website's content went through many changes, one thing has stayed relatively consistent. The girls. 3 girls, the patron girlies of GirlsGoGames.com, watched over our every move. And as the sensibilities of young girls changed, they did too. They experienced multiple makeovers over the years, and it's even a bit questionable whether the trio that exists today are the same characters as the original 3. Today's investigation. Who are the girls of Girls Go Games? Let's start with the basics. These 3 girls are Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. They are a creation of Spill Games, owners of GirlsGoGames.com, and they existed exclusively as mascots for this brand until they were ultimately elevated to the status of Flash game characters. I polled my audience about what they thought these girls' names are, and it turns out that there's very little consensus around which character has what name. It's generally well accepted that the character with black hair is Gwen. However, there's a major split as far as which one is referred to as Grace and which one is referred to as Gabriella. Let me settle this now. There are a few canon instances of these girls being directly and specifically named. First, there's a set of birthday cards released around 2015 that are signed by each of the girls: Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. Although Gabriella uses 2 L's in every other instance, all of the canon references I've seen to these girls' names use Gwen for the girl with black hair, Grace for the girl with brown or pink hair, and Gabriella for the girl with blonde hair. This is supported by the Obby Pocket series of games, which consistently names all 3 characters in multiple games. So if you are part of the 2/3 poll who got Grace and Gabriella backwards, I suggest you look at your screen now. Grace, Gabriella, Grace, Gabriella, Grace, Gabriella, Gabriella, Grace, Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. Now that I've clarified what these girls are called, let's take a look at how they've changed over the years. The first few captures of Girls Go Games from the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine are from September 2007, which gives us the first look at the website's UI and our first iteration of Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. The most obvious identifying feature of this time period was Grace's pink hair, which does not return in any future iteration of these character designs. I'll be referring to this design as Generation 1. These mascots were introduced before Girls Go Games became a big hit, and therefore only have a limited presence in the Flash games, only appearing in the Room Designer games My New Room 1, 2, and the Christmas Edition. Gwen's appearance is more or less settled from this first design until the switch to the Shopaholic designs. She has an angled blue bob with purple and blue highlight and a triangle barrette, blue eyes, pink makeup, a delightfully tacky Hot Topic explosion of an outfit with candy-colored accessories, asymmetrical tights, chunky zip-up boots, and most identifiably her jagged striped red and black shirt. In Generation 1, Grace has a candy pink afro with a yellow comb, glittering gold hoops, green eyes and pink and red makeup, a star t-shirt over an orange striped shirt, long beaded camo shorts, and pansexual pride sandals, or at least just yellow, cyan, and fuchsia. Next is Gabriella, who has wavy blonde hair, light blue eyes with pink makeup, a tiny pink tiara, a green scarf, a light blue top with puffed sleeves and stripe accents, a busy patterned pink skirt, and pink boots with flowers on the sides. To be honest, all 3 of them are a bit messily dressed, but this was the mid to late 2000s and I can appreciate the Disney Channel of it all. Something I find interesting is that all 3 of these girls have freckles. Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella's transition from being a low-res header image to being full-on Flash game characters came in 2008 with the release of My New Room. This is an isometric room designer. Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella show up to give you tutorials and can be placed in the room. Because these 3 have a higher priority on being mascots rather than being characters, they interact exclusively with the player and only provide practical gameplay information that doesn't really reveal much personality. Essentially, they're your blank paper dolls to play with and occupy with your own imagination. I'm sure many an intense soap opera-like drama went on in these rooms. Next is My New Room 2, which I think is a more realized version of the first game. With so many more furniture assets, it feels like you can spend a long time deciding on every little aspect and making things perfect. Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella serve the same role in this game as impartial guides and room occupants. These games would regularly occupy the most popular tab on the Makeover Game subsection. My New Christmas Room is fundamentally the same as My New Room 2, but has a few Christmas-themed items thrown in. Considering that it doesn't trim down the furniture catalog anymore after that, some of the options seem pretty disjointed and dubiously Christmassy. Generation 2 came into being around December 2008. The first version that we see of these redesigned characters are in Christmas outfits, and would replace the prior designs from this moment on. Once this Christmas banner was phased out, we get our first proper look at their new outfits. Gwen in Generation 2 is nearly identical to her first design, just getting some new hands and a face touch-up. Not many of Grace's features are changed, but the decision to change the color of her hair from pink to brown makes this redesign the most obvious. Her camo pants are fixed up and given knee pads, her shoes are replaced with blue and orange sneakers, and like Gwen, her facial features have been subtly replaced. In my opinion, Generation 2 Gabriella sees the most improvement from her redesign. This new outfit is so much more cohesive than what she had before. It's a good example of less is more. Her previous outfit was so busy that it was kind of hard to look at, and now the restrained color scheme and reduced patterns result in a much stronger outfit. Wait, hold on, I sense a missed opportunity here. There we go. The game that properly introduces us to the Generation 2 designs is My New Room 3. This is fundamentally the same as the first two My New Room games, but with a couple additions. GirlsGoGames at the time highly emphasized gameplay that would keep the players returning every day, and they incorporated that into this game by giving us daily room challenges. This week's theme is stories, and today's challenge is Pet Story. I guess that's good enough. The girls appear in unique outfits that aren't featured anywhere else as far as I'm aware, and I have to say I kind of prefer these to the usual outfits. Both Gwen's and Grace's are much more coherent in their color scheme. Gabriella's, I'm not really sure how I feel about this combination of pink and dark purple, but I do love how hoity-toity she looks. Who else is in the People tab? Oh, there's some guys? Wait, huh? Girls Go Boys? Boys Bo Bames? These three are clearly meant to reflect the appearances of Gigi and G, but they're also visibly not the same people. My two best guesses are either that these three are brothers of the mascot trio, or it's more like a Rowdy Rough Boys Powerpuff Girls situation where they just have corresponding appearances for some reason. Can I just say, I'm a little mad that these guys, at least the Gwen and Grace lookalikes, have more personality implied than any of the girls we've seen so far? The fact that Grace Boy is adjusting his glasses and Gwen Boy is dribbling a ball implies that they're a nerd and a jock respectively, although Gabriella Boy doesn't get anything more definitive than the girls. We don't really get these little hints about hobbies or even character archetypes from Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. There's not really anything suggested about these girls other than they are fashionable and they are friends. To evaluate the quality of these games, I would actually say that My New Room 2 plays much better than the third. I'm not sure if this is a consequence of being post-Flash EOL, or if the game was always this broken, but this game has several functionality issues, the worst of which is the fact that the wallpaper and flooring feature is completely broken. You're able to change the floors and walls freely in the second game, but in this case the only thing that ever changes is the right wall, and only if you quit and restart the game. There's also a problem with the rotation mechanic for some of the items. This vanity item got stuck with backward-oriented lines even though its color is facing forward. This feature is now lost, but when GirlsGoGames had user logins and a social aspect, you could upload your finished room to your profile and a public game album. There are two room designer games, My 3D Room and My 3D Room 2, which appeared to be 3D versions of the My New Room games, but I wasn't able to get either one of these running. Even the versions hosted on other websites refused to load, and judging by the large proportion of downvotes, these games have probably been broken for a while. The My New Town games were similar to the My New Room series, but used the mascots even more sparingly. They don't even appear on the title screen of this first game, but this horse does. In these games, you design an outdoor scene instead of a room. Once you have the scene populated, you can place the... You can place the... They don't look so bad as far renders, but I'm also not sure why they didn't just, shrink down their usual vectors. They're just so scary when made even slightly larger. Oh my god! What the hell is this guy doing here? The town games include a Christmas and Valentine's Day variant. Oddly enough, the Valentine's Day game seems more dedicated to the theming of the items. The last game like this I found was the My Pony Park game, which is a horse girl-centric scene designer, including a horse creator. This one's pretty fun. We get unique outfits for the trio too. Did you know that there are literally Girls Go games on Girls Go Games? Let's take a look. Girls Go Christmas. This is a very simple Christmas dress-up game using an art style of these girls that I believe is unique to this game. Besides the rare style of presentation, this game is pretty unremarkable. I strongly prefer dress-up games with a wider variety of options, and this type of UI where you have to click through all the individual options is my least favorite type of dress-up game menu design. Girls Go Fashion Party. Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella all slept in and are now running late to a party, and it's up to you to help them find their stuff and get dressed in time. Hey. This game looks awfully familiar. Yeah, this is more or less just a carbon copy of Sue's Beauty Room, except much less challenging and with 3 levels featuring all of the girls. It really kills me just how much content is locked in these games if you don't have a Girls Go Games account. Now that there are no accounts for that website, they're just completely inaccessible now. Despite being a blatant Sue clone, I do think this is one of their stronger games. This is kind of like Sue's Beauty Room Junior. It's made much easier with its extended time limit and frequent hints, which makes it friendlier for Girls Go Games' younger audience. The art also looks pretty nice. Girls Go Soccer. We've got a new art style again. You dress the girls or create hybrids of them in gear that represents various soccer teams, and then hit proceed to play the soccer game. Oh. It's just a dress-up game. I'm not like a person who enjoys playing Flash soccer games, but I still feel a little bait and switched. I kind of thought I was creating a player character. Girls Go Wheels. I get the feeling that this is also a copycat game, but I'm not sure what it's riffing from. You drive around town performing various favors for the Girls Go Games girls, and everyone in this world drives like a maniac and apparently can't die. The controls are ludicrous, but that is the case for most Flash driving games. It plays well enough, and the time limits are balanced enough to feel challenging without being overly oppressive. I lost a friend. Where did I go wrong? At first, I thought we had our first canon name inconsistency here, but it turns out that Grace is just the person who shows up in the in-game pop-ups no matter who they're talking about. The final 2 games with this naming convention that I could find are Girls Go Models and Girls Go Catwalk, which I believe both featured Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella in some capacity. While I was able to find the files for these games, actually running Shockwave in 2023 is a serious task and not one that I was able to figure out in time to make this video. Welcome to Lee Dates! Today we will be definitively determining the romantic compatibility of today's contestants with only the most reliable compatibility testers, Love Tester Deluxe and Love Tester Deluxe 2. Let's start with the first one. Can I just say, these might be my absolute favorite outfits that they get. They're just hits from left to right. Grace guides us through the name match. Alright, let's begin. Let's get an official, Spill Games approved appraisal of the shippability of Angel and Devil. Oh no. Wait, I wasn't specific enough. It could think I'm talking about any random angel and any random devil. Let me specify. Angel, Girls Go Games. Devil, Girls Go Games. Yeah! Let's try out some others. Mordecai and Twilight Sparkle, 75% perfectly acceptable. Elsa and Jack Frost, 97% nearly perfect. Luigi and Bowser, 93% it's meant to be. Naruto and Sasuke. Oh, no dice. Gwen is the face of the Chinese horoscope section. I was always a little bit less compelled by this one during my Girls Go Games days because when you're still a kid, you're pretty much only crushing on people in your own year, when you're above or when you're below, and that gets pretty predictable after a while. I'm very amused by these little animal icons. I'm Year of the Tiger and that guy looks a little rough. The Great Wizard Gabriella gives us our Western Zodiac compatibility tests. I'm sensing a pattern here. I think in order to not hurt the feelings of their young audience typing in their crush's names and birthdays, these readings tend to be a little generous. I've seen an awful lot of 100% compatibility readings, especially in the birthday ones. Love Tester Deluxe 2 is the follow-up and combines all 3 compatibility readings into a single test with a few others added in. For a full reading, you need to give both a name and birthday, which is admittedly more effort than I'd like to put in for a Flash compatibility tester. But let's at least do Sonic and Amy. Just kind of trusting the internet for these birthdays. Well, it gives us a lot of information, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. I feel like this kind of gives it away a little too much. The thing about checking these compatibility readings separately is that it gives you enough time to forget that they might be contradictory. That's what a cold read is. A successful cold reader will guide you through things incrementally and not bombard you with too much information all at once. Your mind wants to give them the benefit of the doubt and will naturally smooth over any inconsistencies in what they tell you. But this here is kind of doing the opposite. I can see how all the readings are contradicting each other all at once, and it kind of makes the whole thing feel meaningless. What's very interesting to me is how this is designed to integrate with GirlsGoGames profile pages, which is a little more like online dating than most kid sites are willing to attempt. It kind of visually punishes you for not using the profiles because otherwise the picture icon will just be a silhouette of one of the girls. This game has by far the greatest amount of outfit variety that we get to see for these girls. By decompiling the game, I was able to see that each one has 10 unique outfits each, all of which I believe are unique to this game. However, these sprites were never intended to be seen above hip level, and so every one of them is missing pants and shoes. Well, almost all of them except for Grace. Several of her outfits are complete, minus shoes. Next, I have a few disjointed selections. First is this paper fortune teller maker. The girls act as tutorial guides and also appear on the template themselves. For some reason, this oracle has a list of commands instead of actual fortunes, which is an odd take on this kind of thing, and you have to refer to the in-game list because these are extremely unintuitive. Then there's pick and paint. No! I don't accept this! Turn her back! Seriously, the shades of brown are a major oversight in this game. That's the best I can do. Sorry, Grace. This game, if considered canon, actually contains the most lore by far of any of the games so far. The first image establishes that Gwen is a singer. The second shows them together as babies, which is an interesting piece of lore. This implies that they're all the same age and that they've literally known each other for their entire lives. We get 2 more references to Gwen being musically talented. First, this image where she stands on a stage surrounded by music notes, and then this one where she's playing guitar. Also, Grace has a dog. We get another shot from childhood at the end, seemingly older than the first flashback image, but still much younger than we see them today. It simply wouldn't be GirlsGoGames without some Spot the Difference games. Let's take a look at this one first, Sporty Girl Champions. Oh my god! It's them! Also featuring in this game are the robots from the Bomb-It games, Sarah from Sarah's Cooking Class, and the girl from My Lovely Cake Pop, all rendered in a highly adorable style. Unfortunately, there isn't much plot to this one. It's just a montage of the different characters from GirlsGoGames playing sports. And in the end, everyone wins. Look at wait. Look at them! The next Spot the Difference game is Snow White Valentine. This is the story of Snow White. Kind of, except instead of beauty being the point of contention, it's who's the best at making chocolate. Gwen plays Snow White, Grace the evil queen, and Gabriella the prince. Again, this doesn't really reveal anything concrete about these characters because they're literally acting in a play here. I didn't initially recognize that these games were related to the GirlsGoGames mascots, and may have never realized if my viewers didn't tip me off to it. I'm talking about the Lovely Mermaid series of games. 2 Spot the Difference puzzles, a slide puzzle, and an underwater platformer. The first Spot the Difference game is simply titled Lovely Mermaid. The first panel opens on a scene that implies that we're barging into her dressing room. Great. I sure do have to keep looking at this. Hey, how come there's more than one scene where this presumably teenage character is involuntarily seen in a state of undress? Why was this necessary? Anyways, the storyline of this game is loosely based on The Little Mermaid. The mermaid is messing with this boy, a chibi representation of the male character from Bomb-It 3, and ends up in a competition with the other Bomb-It mascot, Bomb Princess, for his affections. She goes to the Sea Witch, who resembles Gwen, and gets some legs. This doesn't seem to help her very much, but no worries. Grace is here and recommends murdering her rival with a knife. And she just agrees. Look at that attempted assassination in the background there. They fight and explode. The final panel lays to rest any ambiguity about whether these 3 are meant to represent the GirlsGoGames girls. Gwen and Grace appear in their usual outfits, and so we can assume that the blonde mermaid was Gabriella all along. One character design change that I've noticed here is that Gwen now has dark purple eyes. I personally really like this change and think it makes more sense visually than her blue eyes. The pictures used in this game are recycled for a puzzle game, Lovely Mermaid Jigsaw. Next is Mermaid Christmas. In this Spot the Difference game, we see the mermaid trio of Grace, Gabriella, and Gwen. They see Santa's sled passing by in the night sky until it has a head-on collision with another sled and crashes into the sea. The mermaids dive in to save the drivers of the sleds, and there they are! The mermaid rescues Angel and Devil. Devil decides to thank them by exploding all three of them into tuna chunks and leaving Angel stranded in the middle of the ocean. Merry Christmas. It's not very clear where these games stand in regards to the canon of these characters. Since Gabriella is seen changing into a mermaid tail, I think it's reasonable to assume that these are mermaid performers and not real mermaids. But hey, this is Girl Gaming World, and so it is plausible that the three of them can just turn into mermaids sometimes. The last Lovely Mermaid game is Lovely Mermaid Ocean Song, and this may be the best playing game we've seen yet. This is a genuinely good Flash platformer. The controls feel tight and fair, and every aspect of its design is pretty great, including the music. I wonder if that's the work of Gu Chen-chung, aka Rico Koo, who's frequently credited in the music of GirlsGoGames. Just as good as the music is the sound effects, they kind of remind me of Super Mario Galaxy. Also, there's a dress-up part at the beginning, which automatically gives it points in its favor. Gabriella, as the titular Lovely Mermaid, is the only playable character unlocked at the start. Grace is unfortunately lost to time, being login-based, but Gwen can be unlocked if you complete the whole game. I considered doing this until I got stuck in a wall. Avi Pocket. This 3D girl has a funky style and three best friends, Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. Grace's scene hair is an interesting choice here. First you paint your skin with, So I'm guessing that they just kind of took the idea of fake tanner and just applied that to every skin tone without thinking about the implications. Bad skin tone change mechanic aside, I actually find these games extremely compelling. Not quite by adult game standards, but I know I would have loved this if I was playing when I was a tween. The mini-games are simple and well-made, most of which are built around custom creations, and it's really satisfying to unlock all the dress-up items. The GirlsGoGames girls appear in this game as friends and minigame guides. Gwen is a nail salon employee, Grace is a candy shop employee, and Gabriella works as a hatter. After you complete all their minigames, you can call them to take pictures with you. The Christmas game is similar, but features Grace as a pet store employee, Gwen as a furniture store employee, and Gabriella as a dressmaker. Again, you can invite them over for photos if you complete all their games. Enter the Shopaholic games. If these games weren't the most popular of the daily games from GirlsGoGames, then, well, they're certainly up there. The Shopaholic games are, in short, Rich Girl Allowance Simulator. You're given a certain amount of money every day, and you go and blow it all on clothes. It's basically the perfect game. From a societal perspective, I'm a bit torn. The fact that the concepts of girliness and shopping are so interlinked is a bad thing. It's downright sinister, to be honest. And this game, where the objective is literally nothing but shopping and modeling the clothes that you bought, well, it couldn't say that exactly sends any positive messages. And yet at the same time, games like this are extremely cathartic. When you're barred by circumstance from dressing the way you want in real life, this game is an effective escape. Oh, free money? And I can spend it however I like? And there'll be more every day? Don't mind if I do! I'm not going to get too deep into the Shopaholic games here because I think that's a good topic for another time. However, there are a few things regarding the mascot characters that I'd like to point out. First, there's very little commitment to consistency in character design after this point. The protagonists of these games vary so much that it's sometimes questionable whether they're inspired by the original trio at all. Second, after the original game Shopaholic Paris, the series gains more playable characters. This includes a group that I consider to be GirlsGoGames' secondary trio. We don't really get to see much of these girls, and as far as I'm aware, they are never given names. My biggest gripe with these games, at least the ones I checked out for this video, are that the clothes don't cycle out. If the shop offerings changed on a daily basis, it would be extremely compelling to return every day. Huh? I haven't seen this shop before. Wow. Very cool. My question is Generation 3, the Shopaholic designs, actually Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella? Or are they just a similar group of three? The reason that I don't think this is quite as cut and dry as a simple change of art style is the fact that the Shopaholic games and the Generation 2 mascot games were being released at the same time. The Shopaholic games and Generation 2 coexisted for years, with the Shopaholic designs being confined to the games alone. GirlsGoGames' header image began to have a bit of an identity crisis starting in 2013, and tended to pick generic anime dress-up girls or mascots from newly released games instead of the typical trio. They stuck with this girl and this fox for a good long while until, boom. Welcome to Generation 3. The Shopaholics have taken over. Generation 1 and 2, Grace, Gwen, and Gabriella were officially retired and would never appear in any future games. I, personally, consider this point to be the beginning of the end for GirlsGoGames. You can see it in the icons. Flash gaming is going out of style. And now these games pretty much just exist to make kids feel better about not having a smartphone. It's okay, sweetie, you might not have apps, but look, these thumbnails kind of look like apps. They would only lean into this more as time passed. This is also around the time that I feel like their inhibitions regarding what content they're willing to host began to drop. They began to dip their toes in Elsa-Gate adjacent content from the beginning of this decade, but after this point is when they really begin to commit to it, and the thumbnails just proceed to get more and more bizarre. Something else that draws the identity of the Shopaholics trio into question are the way that their designs change chaotically from game to game. While GirlsGoGames tends to use the original Shopaholic iterations as Generation 3, the other girls also begin to make some appearances. Some of these later character lists don't contain a group that resembles the original mascot trio at all. The reason why I suspect these girls aren't Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella are because they are now player insert characters exclusively. They're just girls who happen to look like Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella, a trio which a good majority of GirlsGoGames player base can superficially identify with. As far as I'm aware, the names Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella are never used with these design iterations. One thing I will say for the Shopaholic redesigns is that they're somewhat more committed to diversity. Generation 1 and 2 Gwen is widely accepted to be a character of Asian descent. However, her features are too similar to Gabriella's for this to be very obvious. You could just as easily interpret this character design as a white girl with black hair due to her blue eyes. Gwen in the Generation 3 designs has features that little girls of color are much more likely to be able to see themselves in. Her medium skin tone and brown eyes go a long way there. Grace's character model is changed to have brown eyes as well, but we also lose her natural hair texture. This is emblematic of a problem with the Shopaholics games as a whole. Pretty much the only hair options available are straight, wavy, or heat curled, not naturally curly or coily. GirlsGoGames, in my experience, was historically pretty bad about this. Curly and coily hairstyles are extremely underrepresented in their dress-up game library, and the only natural styles we ever see Grace wearing in any generation are an afro or fairly lazily rendered locks. In the Shopaholic game specifically, the afro is only ever a default pre-makeover hairstyle, and I don't think the character who has it is even related to Grace. Grace's Avi Pocket redesign also looks nothing like her. I'm not sure if the people making the 3D models just didn't know how to do textured hair or what, but it looks like they cast an entirely different person to play Grace here than the fairly direct redesigns that the other two get. What these girls suffer from is a very common kind of diversity issue that you see when an effort is made to be diverse, but not enough effort is made to deprioritize white beauty standards. The way that Grace and Gwen have had their designs changed over the years signals to me that Spill was conscious of this, but not necessarily prepared to fix it. Next question. Who are these girls to each other? Honestly, there's really not a lot of establishment to their relationship whatsoever. Each one of them interacts with you, the player, much more than they do with each other. The only exception to this is the Spot the Difference games, which also don't depict any specific details of their relationship and seem to exist in a world where canon is a loose concept. I'm not going to lie. I don't have a strong opinion about these girls. I never really did. I was just kind of like, yes, these are the guardians of GirlsGoGames. And to be honest, I missed out on every single one of these games when I was actually playing on the website. I just never played room designer games, and most of the other ones came out after I had mostly stopped playing on the website. Therefore, I've polled you all about what you think these characters' dynamic is. For clarity, I've changed some references to these girls to their actual names. The most common response is also the most straightforward. Option 1, they're BFFs. I just assumed they were all mid to late teens and were besties who liked hanging out. They were besties, that's all. I just saw them as my dream friend trio. Each one has their own style. They clearly don't judge each other for what they wear or what they like. Option 2, gay. I didn't even really know what polyamory was, but as a kid I kinda just assumed they were all girlfriends or at least had crushes on each other. They are all lesbians and are in a polycule. I thought they were all dating. Option 3, oh my god, they were roommates. I headcanoned them as college-age roommates. As a kid, I made up some sort of backstory that Grace and Gwen were alternative girls who were friends beforehand and then met Gabriella, and at first they didn't like her because she was preppy, but later on they became friends. I always used to imagine that they lived together in a big city in their Totally Spies apartment and slept on one big frilly bed. They'd go on drives in their pink Mercedes and listen to Kesha on the radio. Plus, they were totally over boys. I always thought that they were roommates and they liked traveling together like college besties. They still have their own niche, but they still get along. Option 4. They all hate each other. I used to be obsessed with their room decorating game and would play it like they all hated each other and that it was my task to make a room that they would all like. Or I would favor the dark-haired girl and trap the other two in a corner. Fun times. I always thought these girls hated each other. For my 8-year-old brain, there was no other way. They had such different styles, it wasn't logical for them to be friends. So they just hung out, forced by a superior force or something. I thought they were just co-workers and not real friends, and they really didn't get along, but they had to pretend that they did for work. In the room games, I pretended that they were all extremely competitive and tried to sabotage each other like a reality show. Option 5. Gabriella is a bully. I always pretended that Gabriella was the popular bully. Grace would be her friend and then realized how mean she was to Gwen, and then she'd ditch Gabriella and be Gwen's friend. I remember hating girly preppy characters, so I always made up these really dumb, dramatic stories about how she was evil, and the other two were excluding her because she was evil. Blondie was a total piece of work. The other two girls were BFFs, and they both secretly hated her. Option 6. Gwen and Gabriella have baggage. Gwen and Gabriella dated, then had a messy breakup. They're pretending to be friends for Grace. I always remember shipping Gwen and Gabriella together a lot when I was younger. Like, I thought that Gabriella would go to the mall together with Grace, and then Gwen would see and get jealous and run off. All the classic miscommunication issues. These girls all had complex storylines that I used to act out in my grandma's smoke-filled office. Gwen and Gabriella were always pitted against each other, obviously preppy versus goth, because they were both headstrong and opinionated, and Grace acted as the mediator. Option 7. They exist in the Bratz universe. I used to think that they were somehow related to the Bratz line. Even though I was more of a Barbie kid, I used to browse the Bratz section in stores as well to see if I could at least find dolls of these girls, but obviously I never did. For some reason, I thought they were in the same world as Bratz, and they would read Bratz magazines and read up on fashion tips. Sometimes I'd even associate them with Totally Spies, but not always. And finally, option 8. They are literally totally spies. When I was younger, I had this whole story going on about how the three were cool action spy girls who worked for some rich lady. No, I didn't steal this concept from Totally Spies. What do you mean? They're the Totally Spies trio, but to the left. For some reason, I always thought that they were the girls from Totally Spies. They've always reminded me of the Totally Spies girls. I like to think that Gabriella's personality was similar to Clover's, Gwen's to Alex's, and Grace's to Sam's. This one isn't related to their dynamic, but gets an honorable mention. When the Shopaholic games started coming out and featured a trio of characters that looked suspiciously similar to these three, I logically knew that they were probably intended to be the same people, but I still thought that the Shopaholic girls were their evil clones sent out to eliminate and replace the GGG girls, which proved to be true when the Shopaholic-style girls appeared on the front page of the website around 2015. I've decided that's canon. Do you know about the Girl Gaming Flash Trio Multiverse? When it comes to girls' Flash game website branding, they tend to come in 3 varieties: text-only logo, single-figure logo, or girl group logo. And that last one, the girl group logo, seemed to be more often than not directly based on the appearances of Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella. What made me aware of the similar but different versions of these girls were the 3 girls that appear in the loading screens of certain Avatar Star Sue games created by iBravo. From the first moment I saw them, I could immediately tell that these characters are related. I honestly really adore these character designs. They are so fun and detailed. Each one has so much personality, and it's all done in that iconic Sue art style. However, these girls got much less exposure than the GirlsGoGames trio, only appearing in a handful of iBravo games, and as far as I'm aware, never appearing in a bespoke game themselves. So my question is, which group came first? iBravo or GirlsGoGames? While the GirlsGoGames trio is by far the better known of the two, I am not confident that they came first. iBravo existed for several years before GirlsGoGames, and therefore had plenty of time to establish these characters before GirlsGoGames even existed. By looking at the games available from iBravo's Wayback Machine archive, I can figure out which one came first. Most of iBravo is locked behind a login, which is unfortunately beyond the Wayback Machine's ability to access. However, there are a few things that I can see, one of them being a new games section after 2004. Let's see when these games stopped being updated. So here's 2004, and 2005, 2006, Uh-oh. That's a bit of a smoking gun. It seems like there weren't any new Sue games created after 2004, at least not that I can find evidence of with the captures of iBravo.com. That means without a doubt the iBravo versions of these characters came first, and GirlsGoGames just came around and yanked the Flash Girl Game Trio crown away from them. Even though these three came first, the rest of the derivatives that I have to talk about are almost certainly inspired by or copied from the GirlsGoGames trio. These three original characters were used very rarely. They appear in only a small minority of the Sue games, and as far as I'm aware, none of the other iBravo titles on Flashpoint. If these characters were ever regularly used outside of that context, I can't find any evidence of it. I am very confident that this design similarity is not a coincidence. While Gwen, Grace, and Gabriella are pretty heavily adapted, the girls' color palettes, particularly Grace's prank afro, have too much in common to have not been intentional, especially considering the early days of GirlsGoGames relied heavily on iBravo for content. Now, who else was out there? Let's take a look at the other girly Flash gaming websites from around this time. How about Girl Games 123? Oh. If the GirlsGoGames girls are a loose adaptation of the iBravo girls, then this trio is just a straight-up ripoff, even taking some very specific character details like Grace's gold hoops. From these character designs to the pink of the website, I think it's pretty clear that Girl Games 123 wanted you to think that they were GirlsGoGames. Their Wayback Machine captures begin 1 year after GirlsGoGames, which doesn't exactly prove anything, but, well, it's clear that this site is derivative from GGG in every way. Next stop, Game Girly. This one's less of a dead ringer, but look what happens when I go back to 2009. A very obvious copy of GirlsGoGames design from around the same time. These three mascots look the least intentional of all the ones we've seen so far. It sort of seems like they took three random dress-up game characters and not even in similar styles. But I guess the designers were like, well, GirlsGoGames has three girls, so we need three girls. Girls Play tended to shuffle through a lot of mascots over the years, but I found at least one instance of Grace, Gwen, and Gabriella alikes. Specifically, this version seems to be based after the Shopaholic versions of the characters, including the red-headed Shopaholic girl. These girls would stick around for a few years before getting replaced with this trio in 2022. I suspect that there used to be other instances of copycat trios, but I also imagine that a decent proportion of these websites went defunct after Flash EOL, and therefore they're just much harder to find now. And now the final question about these three that I'd like to speculate about. Where could they go from here? I am a Zillennial who is perpetually researching Zillennial media, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm particularly in tune with what today's kids are interested in. So this is less of a, they must do this for the good of GirlsGoGames sort of thing, and more just something that I think would be very cool. I think that these three would be great in a murder mystery. Here's the vision. Similar to Avi, you'd have a player character as your avatar, and obviously you'd get to customize and dress them up at the beginning. Obviously. The setting? Somewhere glam. I'm thinking a fashion show. Gabriella's on makeup, Gwen's on hair, Grace is a model, and you are a detective who has shown up because the designer has been mysteriously murdered. But like in a very minimally graphic way, like he's just like slumped over from poison. This is a family murder. In this universe, they aren't friends yet and may even be cold and distrusting towards each other at first because of the circumstances. During the investigation, you meet each one, and with your help, they both build their friendship and solve the murder. For the evidence-gathering sections, there could be like an I Spy or Spot the Difference game, but everything else would essentially be a visual novel. Maybe there could be 3 possible endings for maximum replay value. To avoid writing the script 3 whole times, you could just change the twist reveal and any hints to it that appear before. This would be considered a new generation, and so any art style could be used, and the girls' features don't have to perfectly resemble their original designs. They just need to be identifiable as each other. If murder is too intense, just like make it a heist mystery, I don't know. The problem is that this kind of game would take a lot of skill and effort, and would also be very difficult to translate into all the languages that Spill games usually support. This kind of game isn't really possible to make with little or no words. I don't think that this will ever happen, but I would love it. That's all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I had a video where I played all the GirlsGoGames daily quizzes, but then it exploded. It exploded into 1,000 tiny pieces. Once I summon the will to record it again, it'll be available to be viewed for $5 per month. That will also grant you access to my backlog of exclusive videos. Come say hi on Discord. There are some channels for everybody and some exclusive channels for $2.50 per month. Thank you so much to Khan, Fishcatch, Julia, Ms. Goat, Riley Meyer, and Tara Tara. And a heartfelt thank you to Cool Shirts because these are honestly some of the best clothes that I own now. Okay. Bye.